Hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of Sports Science Hacks, where today I'm going to speak about planning your introduction. Really important that you plan it. All too often I think people look at a blank screen, have no idea where to begin. You need that structure first. So I'm going to show you that now. My example paper is going to be about injury rates in CrossFit, more specifically female CrossFit athletes. Now, don't worry about that title, don't worry about this area. What I want you to learn from this is the structure. Doesn't matter if I speak about CrossFit or beta-alanine today, the structure you'll see below will relate to what you're going to write. Okay, you're going to see 4 subheadings in green font below. You can see number 1 there. But just before I go into that, I just want to say to you, you don't need these subheadings in your actual introduction. They're only here just to show you so I can clearly break down what each paragraph looks like. When you're doing your draft version, maybe put those subheadings in, make sure you're on the right track, but don't put them in at the end. Okay, so I'm going to start off with number 1, which is the background definition. So this paper is about CrossFit. I should probably say what CrossFit is. The introduction is for a layman. You have to get the layman to read it and understand what your area is. So a lot of background and definitions where appropriate. Other things I'd talk about in relation to CrossFit would be what it's beneficial, this is why people do it, and this is how many people do it. So 100 million people around the world, or whatever that statistic is, find a reference. You can see in red font, reference. But lots of references in. If you do a whole paragraph and there's no references, it's going to affect your grade. So ignore CrossFit if you're not thinking about that. That's not your paper. Think about your own paper now for a few seconds. Look at what I've put and ask yourself, well, what would my context be for the paper that I'm doing? Okay, you might want to pause, think about that before we move on. I'm going to move on now to number 2. Now this paper, as mentioned, is about injuries in CrossFit. Now, I won't go straight into injuries in females. You could do, but I would start off quite broadly to create the context and the story. So I would say something along the lines of, well, like any sport, CrossFit has the risk of injury, and this is where you start putting your references in. So you need to speak about previous research. So your first sentence after that could be, well, in the first study to measure this, they found what they found. In further research, so I put males here, so you can start off quite broadly. Doesn't have to all be about female athletes, be very broad. And then if there's research that's conflicting, maybe all the papers don't agree with themselves, so you could say, well, in a different paper, this said blah, blah, blah. Basically, you're given that story. And at the end of this paragraph, I would say something along the lines of this. Well, after speaking about these 3 or 4 papers, the current evidence, now I've put appears to suggest. If it's much stronger, you could say it shows. The language you use kind of depends on how strong the argument is. But you'll say, current evidence has shown this. Okay, now I'm going to move into my more specific area, which is my paper, which would be about CrossFit injuries in female athletes. So let's say, for argument's sake, there's only one paper that's done it. Typically, anything you're writing about, you're writing it for a good reason. There's probably no research, little research, or the previous research was rubbish. But going back to this point, I'd say something like this in my next paragraph. Well, at present, despite all this kind of broad stuff in the research, this niche area, there's only one paper. In this paper, this happened. So I just speak about briefly the methodology of the paper, the results of the paper, and then what you need to do is sell the paper, what you're doing. So you need to kind of put doubt in the reader's mind and say, well, there's not enough research, or this paper here, well, it was limited for X, Y, and Z reasons. So then you kind of create that doubt. You're saying this research has been done, maybe it's not very good. So therefore, we need more research. So you put a sentence towards the end saying further research, basically meaning what you're going to do, is required because of this reason or for that reason. And as I said, you're persuading the reader. Towards the end of the intro, as a reader, I should be looking at it and thinking, yeah, actually, from what you've said, we do need more research in this area. So you've put together a really good argument here. So that's how you finish that off. Last part's really simple. You just have to say the purpose of your study. Very short paragraph. Usually starts off with a sentence like this, or therefore the purpose of this study is to investigate this. Keep it very short. Don't go into great detail because you're going to do that in the methodology afterwards. So keep it very, very short. Very concise, to the point. Okay, so that was my very brief video on putting together your introduction. I recommend you plan it in a very similar way, and it will definitely save you time in the long term. If you want me to do more videos about an introduction, or have any questions about an introduction, get in touch with me on Instagram at Sports Science Hacks. Okay, Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video.